Welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing something a little different today. We're building a comprehensive visual study guide to master the complex concepts that completely reshaped modern European borders. We're going to unpack the massive, messy shift from absolute monarchies to the nation-states we actually recognize today, and we'll define exactly what monumental terms like nationalism and liberalism really meant in their original 19th century context.
Here's our agenda for today's Explainer. First, the utopian vision. Second, defining the nation-state. Third, fall of absolute monarchies. Fourth, what is liberal nationalism? Fifth, the strange British case. And finally, the imperialist turn. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Utopian Vision. Okay, let's start with this incredible vision from 1848. A French artist named Frédéric Soriot dreamed up this world made of what he called democratic and social republics. Notice how he paints distinct nations marching peacefully together, and look at the ground. They are literally walking past the shattered remains of absolutist institutions. Smashed crowns, broken royal symbols, the whole shebang. It's a powerful, highly idealistic starting point for our study guide. I mean, it's a beautiful dream of people freely identifying with their own nations long before that idea became, well, a very messy reality.
Moving on to Section 2, defining the nation-state. All right, here's our first core definition, the nation-state. Basically, it's a modern state where the citizens, not just the rulers, develop a shared identity, a shared history, and a sense of common descent. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that nation-states didn't just exist from the dawn of time. No way. They had to be actively engineered. Before this, you had vastly diverse groups of people lumped together under giant autocracies, often without sharing a culture or even a language. The nation-state was forged through real struggle, deliberate actions by leaders, and everyday people actively deciding, hey, we belong together. Next up on the vocab list, we have plebiscite. Now, this is a direct vote where all the people of a region are asked to accept or reject a specific proposal. It sounds pretty basic to us now, but back then, this concept of direct, everyday consent was totally radical. It introduced a massive shift in how political power was actually validated. It basically took ultimate authority out of the hands of some distant hereditary king and put it right into the hands of everyday inhabitants.
And that brings us perfectly to the French philosopher Ernst Renan. Speaking in 1882, Renan completely rejected the idea that a nation is just about having a shared race or speaking the same language. Instead, he famously declared that the existence of a nation is a daily plebiscite. It's a large-scale solidarity bound by a heroic past, sure, but it requires a continuous, active choice by the people in the present to stand together. You have to wake up and choose to be part of the nation every single day.
That brings us to Section 3, Fall of Absolute Monarchies. Let's talk about this monumental shift in human organization. If you contrast the old absolute monarchies with these newly emerging nation-states, it is literally night and day. Under absolutism, you had these centralized, repressive rulers dictating over vast empires made up of entirely different ethnic groups who honestly felt zero connection to one another. But under a nation-state, the whole foundation is popular sovereignty. The people themselves actually constitute the nation and share a history. It completely flipped the script on how society was governed.
We see this massive shift formally ignite in 1789 with the French Revolution. Guys, this was really the first clear expression of nationalism. These revolutionaries didn't just depose a king, they fundamentally transferred sovereignty over to a body of French citizens. And they actively engineered this new mindset by heavily promoting concepts like la patrie, meaning the fatherland, and le citoyen, the citizen. They were quite literally writing the modern national identity playbook right there on the spot.
All right, Section 4. What is liberal nationalism?
So, for the rising educated middle class, forming a nation wasn't just about drawing new lines on a map. It was really about ending autocracy entirely. Enter our next big study guide term, liberalism. Derived from the Latin word for free, it stood for individual freedom, equality before the law, and government by consent. Politically speaking, it meant having a constitution and a representative parliament. Economically, it meant free markets and abolishing annoying state-imposed restrictions on trade. Basically, nation-building and liberal freedoms were two sides of the exact same coin.
But we have to note that early liberalism had some stark, honestly, ironic limits. For instance, equality before the law definitely did not extend to women. Take liberal politician Karl Welcker. He openly argued that nature designated women as weaker and dependent. It's wild to think about because women formed political associations and fought fiercely alongside men for the nation-state.
Yet, when those newly won parliaments finally convened, women were actively denied suffrage rights and strictly relegated to the visitors' gallery just as observers.
Now, directly opposing all these liberal ideas was conservatism. This was a political philosophy stressing the absolute importance of tradition, established institutions, and gradual development over quick, radical change. After Napoleon was defeated in 1815, these conservative forces desperately wanted to restore the traditional monarchies and social hierarchies. They looked back at the rapid, terrifying chaos of the French Revolution and decided, nope, the church and traditional autocratic structures are the only way to maintain order. I absolutely love this famous 1819 caricature called The Club of Thinkers. Notice the muzzles literally tied around their mouths? It so perfectly illustrates the severe censorship laws conservatives used to crush liberal demands for freedom. The sign above them essentially asks, how long will we still be allowed to think? It hits the nail on the head regarding how conservative regimes dealt with rising demands for a free press. They just gagged the opposition.
So we're looking at a super stark philosophical battleground that really defined 19th century Europe. In one corner, you've got liberalism, pushing for an end to clerical privileges, demanding free markets, and fighting tooth and nail for constitutional government by consent. And in the other corner, conservatism, clamping down with autocratic rule and strict censorship to protect the old social order. Understanding this specific friction is absolutely crucial for your study guide because it explains exactly why Europe experienced so many explosive revolutions during this period.
Moving on to Section 5, the strange British case.
Now, the British model is fascinating because it shows us that building a nation-state doesn't always require a sudden, violent revolution. It can also be the result of a really long, drawn-out process of institutional dominance. Prior to the 18th century, there wasn't really a British nation at all. It was just distinct English, Welsh, Scottish, and Irish identities. But as the English nation grew in wealth and power, their parliament, which by the way had officially seized power from the monarchy way back in 1688, steadily became the center of gravity. Eventually, with the 1707 Act of Union, England essentially imposed its influence and absorbed Scotland. They paved the way for a unified state forged mostly through systematic political maneuvering.
Finally, we reach Section 6, the imperialist turn.
So, what happens next? Well, by the late 19th century, nationalism's utopian liberal democratic dream really decayed into a narrow, intolerant creed. It aligned closely with imperialism, leading directly to a relentless scramble for global colonies. Major powers began manipulating the genuine nationalist feelings of their own citizens simply to justify dominating other parts of the world. Suddenly, national pride was being measured not by how much freedom you had at home, but by how many foreign territories your country could subjugate.
And that brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. As you review this study guide, I want you to really ask yourself, how did the powerful democratic desire for a shared identity ultimately pave the way for one of history's absolute darkest conflicts? I mean, it started with Sorio's beautiful dream of republics marching in peace, and it ended with the catastrophic global disaster of World War I in 1914, driven largely by imperialist nationalism. It's a profound reminder of just how rapidly political concepts can mutate. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Make sure you keep reviewing those definitions and never stop questioning the history behind the map.